I'm going to turn this over to Mick Needham.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I guess I have not much more to say. That's a pretty good introduction. It's actually 51 years now. And I left Toad Hall a year before it burned down. I was fortunate to find a good location a year before it burned down. But anyway, I want to get started on this. It's a little bit of history, but it's more for entertainment, and there'll be some local history and some broader history, but I think you'll enjoy it. One of the things that always intrigues me is what makes a collector, what motivates us to collect. And everyone collects different things, and you know, something that turns me on to the next guy, he could care less about it. This guy, this slide that you see up here, is an attorney from Las Vegas, and he actually has restored an original locomotive and trucks it all over the country at his own expense. In this particular slide, I was on an excursion, and they'd pull up and stop, and you climb off and get up in the rocks, and then they back it up and run. It looks like a toy, doesn't it? Anyway, so that's a collecting experience most of us aren't going to have, locomotives. But at any rate, there are a lot of those old tea kettle style locomotives around. You can see them at the Sacramento Railroad Museum. And from a collector's perspective, there are lots of neat things to collect in these old locomotives. And what I'm going to try and do is hit high points and show you things and try and show you where that inspiration comes from. One of the things that people collect is builder's plates and all kinds of iron plates and bronze plates. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's from the Central Pacific Railroad that built the Transcontinental Railroad, and it's dated 1865. Here is the same type of locomotive, two tea kettle locomotives that collided behind the Chico Depot in the 1870s. This is a photograph that I had for some time, and it took Michelle Shover to identify it for me. That's about all I know about it. It predates the Central Pacific. The Central Pacific used the California and Oregon to build its railroad, and shortly after the railroad was built from, I think it was Sacramento to the border, that changed. I don't know what you call it. They had created this holding company to build it, and as soon as it was there, they dissolved it. Now that you've probably all seen this photograph. This is a photograph of Chico in 1871, I think it is. But it's kind of interesting to see. It's a photograph of a map. If you notice the curved section up in the right, that's where the branch line that comes into Chico from the Central Pacific main line that runs from the upper right corner to the top left corner. You can see the straight line that goes across. Here's a detail of that. You can see where it comes down, and comes down all the way down 2nd Street. And this is before the college was there. Turns and goes to I think it's the Sperry Mill, which is where Northern Star Mills is now. You can see the mill and the curves, and that curve now is where the highway is that goes to Broadway. You see that curve at the left? It's kind of neat to see that. Pardon?
Looking southwest of the view.
Yeah, southwest, exactly. Almost more westerly, but southwest. And here's that water tower you see it's hard to see in the little picture in the top there where the first curve is, but here it is. This is the Chico Water Works. Early. And this is Chico State, the Chico Normal School, but you notice in the foreground there's a railroad track. That's that track that you saw that goes over to the Sperry Mill. I think it's called the Sperry Mill. Correct me if somebody that knows. I get my dates and my names. Pardon?
It was Bidwell's Roller Flour Mill.
Bidwell Roller Flour Mill? Okay. So I get my dates and my names mixed up all the time. As I get older, it happens more and more too. But anyway, can you imagine a railroad track going through the campus today? Here's a shot. You're standing up in the top of that building now, and it's a shot towards the downtown. If you have a sharp eye, you can actually see the building we're in. The old library has the little domed peak right in the middle of just a little to the right of the middle. And you can see the railroad track that we saw from the other angle. Times have certainly changed, haven't they? You can see on the left, there's just one water tank. The other one hasn't been built yet. Now, before the railroads, stagecoaches came along, and they had to have a way to identify bags so that people would get the right bag. So when you got your bag, when you checked your bag in, they would give you a metal tag, and it would be a set, one of a set, and the other tag would be attached to your bag. When you got to your destination, you'd show them the metal tag, and they'd go find the one. So this is from the Overland Mail and Express Company, which predates the railroads, and the railroads used this later, and those are very collectible. People, especially me, people love those. Here's an early immigrant tag from the Council Bluffs from Council Bluffs to San Francisco, and you'll notice on it says UP, CP, and WP railroads. This predates the Western Pacific we're all familiar with. This is the Western Pacific that went down through Niles Canyon and back up to San Francisco. Now the reason the railroad went this way is another railroad had the right-of-way to get into San Francisco, the California Pacific, and the Central Pacific couldn't get in, so they had to go all the way around and down and back up. So you can bet that was the first thing they tried to acquire as they gained more and more power. And here's a map of that. It's kind of hard to see, but it's I think it's am I getting me? California Pacific Railroad. It was the short route. So if you were a passenger on a transcontinental railroad, it was much quicker to transfer to the California Pacific rather than spend more time going all the way around. It's kind of an interesting little fact. And then this is a Central Pacific baggage tag, and you can see how oftentimes they would write the destination in that little window on a piece of paper, so that if you couldn't speak English, you could give one of the tags to the porter. I'm assuming, I don't know why there would be three, but I'm assuming one would go to the porter, one would go on the trunk or basket or whatever, or your suitcase, whatever you're traveling with, and you'd have the other. But if you couldn't speak English, how would you know what stop to get off at? I don't know any ideas why there's three sometimes? And here are, I can't get it to advance. So maybe if I do it this way. Here we go. Here's a whole bunch of them. The one that's really of interest is that middle one on the top. It says immigrant on it.
Wow.
Now this is an immigrant that would have come from San Francisco on the Central Pacific and ridden to whatever destination he was going to. Most likely it was from China, because immigrants from Europe would have come through Ellis Island. And there are immigrant tags from Ellis Island as well. But nice collection of different Central Pacific tags. And I think the highlight here is the immigrant tag. They're very, very rare. We lost our mic. Maybe I'll just talk loud. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. If you can get that going, great. But otherwise, I'll talk loud. Here's a Southern Pacific tag. Southern Pacific came along later and acquired the Central Pacific, or basically was a corporate change for financial reasons. So Southern Pacific was extremely good at that. There were books written about how powerful they were and how they misused their power. It's kind of interesting. But where have all these tags gone? Well, a lot of these tags were melted down during the war. Where do you find them? It's pretty bizarre. Some railroads melted them all down. Myself and a friend that collect found a guy that's a bottle digger, and bottle diggers find all kinds of things other than just bottles. And this is what the bottom of the hole looked like where they were digging, and if you look closely, you can see a bunch of tags. Now this was probably originally a privy, and somebody took a box or a bag of tags when it changed from the Central Pacific to the Southern Pacific. They became obsolete. They just threw them in the privy. So there were all of these tags in this hole in the ground that these diggers found, and they wouldn't tell us where they found them. It was either on private property or government property, or they didn't want other diggers to know where it was. They wouldn't even tell us how deep the hole was. At any rate, this is the way they looked when we took them out. And then this is the way you can really see the corrosion. Now rust would have, steel and ferrous metals would have been gone. They would have rusted away. When you find a padlock or something that had an iron chain, it's just kind of a corrosion of rusty gunge. But bronze doesn't melt away like ferrous metals do. Bronze and brass, copper. But depending on the kind of ground it's in, sometimes it does leach out some of the minerals in the brass. But here's the way those immigrant tags looked after they were cleaned up. My friend, and at this point when these were found, no Central Pacific tags had ever shown up. There were none around. So myself and my friend from Southern California down in the mountains by San Diego actually, we bought a pile of dirt with all these tags in it. People thought we were crazy. Those tags sold for a huge amount of money each, and we made a lot. We paid $5,000 for this pile of dirt, and we more than quadrupled our money for a pile of dirt. Plus I have probably the prize, the immigrant tags. That's the nicest set known. And every railroad had them. You'll all recognize the Sierra Railway Company, which is now state-owned museum and down in Jamestown. Nevada County narrow gauge. These are all real collectible. Now another collectible is railroad lanterns, and I don't know for sure how they came to be, but my friend who's a collector in Oregon, Steve Spalding, supplied me with this picture, and you can see how that shows the lantern is hanging on the locomotive, and this is during the building of the Central Pacific Railroad. And that's a Central Pacific lantern, and it's literally worth more than its weight in gold. Pretty cool to see that though. Now they developed specialized lanterns for that, but originally they didn't have specialized lanterns. They just hung them. So here's that lantern up close, and if you look closely you can see where it says CPRR of Cal and a cast globe, and that would be a down payment on a house right there, or maybe a brand new Mercedes. Here's a Southern Pacific lantern with a cast globe that very desirable because it's a brass top bell bottom, and those are the most desirable. Another collectible though that I really like, I have a few lanterns, but I really like railroad locks and keys. And here are 4 different Central Pacific locks and keys, and they're pretty common. You see a lot of them. Most of them are dug in the desert or dug, and all the metal parts have rusted away and they don't work, and they're called relics. But these all the springs work, and that's pretty cool. But they give rise to another collectible that probably most of you are aware of, is the switch keys. Whoops. And switch keys are really very collectible. And they run the range from $20 to thousands of dollars. The Central Pacific keys are some of the top ones. They're really hard to find. Whoops, I'm going back here.
When you say switch key, what does that mean?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. The switch keys, oops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that. Switch keys were used for the switch stands that control which track, which way the train went. So you could, and they were all locked. So it was for safety reasons. So what you see here are 2 different types of keys. The switch keys are the ones that are a little bit smaller, and then car keys are a little bit bigger. And it's hard to tell the difference from this picture, but here's a slide that shows the back of a lot of different keys. So if you look closely, you can see some say switch, some say car, some have a C, some say water service, WS for water service. So they're all considered switch keys even though they're not for switches. All oil box, baggage, BCC for bag. Every single thing that got locked on the railroad had a key or a lock, and the keys were, the key for any one switch on that railroad would open all of the switches. all the keys for the cars would open all of the switches. A little bit later, they had an opening on both ends of a freight car for refrigeration cars for putting ice in, and they would lock, those had locks also. So there are oftentimes far more car keys than there are switch keys. And each railroad, it's like everything, the more you collect, the more you understand about what's valuable and what's not valuable. Some railroads you'd think are very rare and the keys would be very valuable. The market's flooded with them and they're not. Western keys from the West Coast are far more valuable than keys from the East Coast, even though the East Coast keys can be much older. The railroads that came to the West Coast came much later, after the Central Pacific Railroad. There were a few railroads before that, but not many. And the same thing goes true with padlocks. Here you see padlocks for many different purposes: roadway and bridge, water service, specials, switch. Now when Harriman took over so many different railroads right after the turn of the century, he gained control of the Southern Pacific, the Union Pacific, and all of these other railroads. You can see on here Oregon Short Line, Oregon Railway and Navigation Company, Oregon Washington Railroad and Navigation Company. All these railroads were controlled by him, and he was a very organized man. He made common standard, that's what the CS stands for on all these, and he did it with not only locks and keys but bridges and depots, and and all of the things that you would see on a railroad. He had a common standard, and he controlled many different railroads. He was genuinely a huge tycoon. So that's a little bit on railroad locks. And embossed locks bring more, the ones with raised cast letters, than the stamped locks. Like every hobby, there are a number of reproductions that show up, or fakes or frauds. The embossed ones are almost impossible to fake, although we're seeing them come in from Thailand now and other areas. But you can tell, once you know, you can tell. The stamped ones are a little harder to tell, and there are people that are stamping them. So you have to be careful, and you kind of, like every hobby, you kind of have to know what you're doing. Then another very collectible item are railroad passes. And this is one from the Butte County Railroad, and you can see it's dated 1905. This one was issued to J.A. Peck and a detective. It's kind of cool. But this is from our own Butte County Railroad that went from the mill down on 16th Street, south up the Skyway, through Paradise and Magalia up to Sterling City. So it's kind of fun to see that. Here's another one. They were issued to, question?
That's clever.
Yeah, Fred Buck, he's the general manager.
Yeah, he was the general manager of the railroad. They were issued to employees and to families of employees, to other executives. It's really interesting, all kinds of different names. Some passes are extremely rare. Some are, you'd think are rare or common. Once again, you really got to know what you're looking at, and once again, they're reproduced a lot. Here's a fun one from the Carson and Colorado Railroad. That's the one that went on the backside of the Sierras from Mound House, but near Reno, all the way to Carson, to Keeler. And eventually it was continued on for the aqueduct into Los Angeles. Here's a little fun item. I noticed there's one on display over here. It's a commercial venture that the Butte County Railroad put out, expounding all the virtues of living in Butte County and all the things that would grow and how inexpensive housing was and how wonderful. Times have certainly changed, I guess. And I see you can, if you want to get a copy, you can send to this little, it says right there, you can, I can't hardly read it on this one, but you can see the pink. It says you can order a copy from right there. So if you want to write that down and send it to the railroad. And other types of advertising. This is a Butte County Railroad, I don't even know what it is, but Diamond Match Company and Butte County Railroad in Sterling City, May 27th, 1905. Some kind of promotional card.
Like an annual picnic.
Okay, an annual picnic announcement probably. Kind of cool things. And here's a baggage tag from the Butte County Railroad. They had them too. After the turn of the century, you don't see many brass baggage tags. They switched to paper. It's just not the same as the brass, in my world anyway. And then here's one. Now, why would the Hotel Diamond need a baggage tag? When the train would pull into the depot, they'd just take the baggage and throw it on a cart. So the guy that's delivering the bags would look at the baggage tag or would ask people. I don't know how they would get the information, but he put a Hotel Diamond one on it. Here's another Hotel Diamond. It's kind of interesting. The home of the man with the grip. And it gives in the Chico, California, J.R. Adler, manager of the Hotel Diamond. So, and this was a two-part one. It probably had a paper thing inside. Kind of cool. This came from the collection of Randy Taylor, my good friend Randy. And another one from the Park Hotel, Chico, California. And then here's a little one that I've only seen one. It's the Johnson House. Anybody know where that was? Nope, that was on 3rd and Broadway, where Burgers and Brew is now.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That place had a reputation, didn't it?
I've heard stories that there was a brothel in the upstairs of the Johnson House, but I have no way to prove it. It was before my time. Of course, I wouldn't know anyway. So. Another thing that's very collectible is that paper collectibles, railroad timetables. And Butte County Railroad was no exception. They printed a timetable. You could get a timetable and you would know how to arrange your itinerary to travel. Here's the inside, and it gives the times and arrival dates. And the railroads tried to run a pretty tight ship. Another collectible, and I don't have any pictures, was watches. You know, all the conductors had watches, and they eventually had watches that had to be checked by different. I should include that. I have a framed post of a framed a card from a watch shop in Crockett that Bob Noy's uncle ran. Bob Noy's a friend of mine here in Chico. Many of you probably know Bob, and it's it's an accredited place where you can get your watches checked, and they are set to, they have to run in 7 positions and all kinds of things. But moving on, here's a fun picture, and I noticed there's a copy of this. This was a cabinet card that was shot of the Butte County Railroad with some of the engine crew. Cabinet cards, most of you probably know, but they were shot by a local photographer and printed and sold. So there were a lot of this card or other cards. One of the items on this that you see is that those domes on the top of the engine. There's a whistle, that thing sticking up on the second dome over from the cab, and the whistles varied pretty dramatically. Here's a whistle. This is actually a Santa Fe whistle, but this is the style. It's 5 chamber, so it had a really melodic sound. They're very collectible and very expensive. There's another one of those early locomotives, but it has the whistle sticking up there. And this is the type of whistle, with my dog kind of checking it out. My late dog, this is Lola. But this kind of whistle is interesting because the balanced whistle valve, like these have, they were balanced. The valve worked, didn't have to work against the pressure. It worked sideways, where this valve literally had to work against the pressure. It was on the bottom of the whistle, so when you raised the stem up, you didn't pull this one down, you had to raise it up. It pushed against the pressure on the boiler. So they had a long arm. So I don't know if you can see it on this, but that arm goes way back, and it had a metal thing that you had to push up rather than a rope you pulled down. These whistles were around, and they were manufactured by the Central Pacific, or oftentimes by the railroad and by different whistle manufacturers, but they're much earlier. Here's an interesting shot of the train shed for the Butte County Railroad down at Diamond Match, and that shows some Butte County locomotives.
Where was that?
That was right to the west and south of the Diamond Match plant down there. Here's another shot, shows the main line. I'm not sure if that's the main line to the left. I think the main line was farther to the left of the line of telephone poles. It was a 4-stall engine house. Later, I have a map, a bird's eye shot of the map, and I think you can see that in there. But this is one of my joys, is the padlocks and keys. I really love the railroad padlocks and keys. This is a Butte County Railroad padlock. All of the switches for the Butte County Railroad all the way to Sterling City would have had one of these locks on it, and very few of them have surfaced. And the keys, they're all the same. There's one of the keys. They're stamped with the railroad name, and the other side would have had S for switch.
Were they chained to the switch?
No, no. Then anybody could open it. All the padlocks, yeah, all the padlocks were chained to the switch so that they didn't get lost. A lot of times trainmen, if they were in a hurry, would just kind of throw it down. And there were some types of padlocks, I don't have pictures of them, I don't collect them, but the keen cutter style that had railroad names cast on them, they didn't work very well, and they had little spindly, regular old padlock keys, and the trainmen hated them, so when nobody was looking, they'd take the padlock and just throw it away. So a lot of diggers will dig around where they found newer switches were, and they'd find them. And they're very collectible. They just don't do it for me. Another thing that's very collectible is lanterns, and those of you with a sharp eye will recognize those letters. This is a pre-1915 lantern, BCRR. They're really collectible. Lanterns seem to be one of the rarer things in collecting, particularly colored globes, and I think I have some images later. Here's an image of a Butte County Railroad steam shovel. This is compliments. I think Randy has the original of this. See the BCRR on the left there, up top by the roof. Now this is a shot of the Sterling City Mill, and the bottom one I think is Diamond Match. And this is shot from, I believe, Kent Stevens' book on the Butte County Railroad. Matches, Flumes, and Rails. It's really a great book on the Butte County Railroad and the Diamond Match plant. I think this next slide, yeah, that's the overhead shot, and I can't tell I think that's the engine shop right there on the left, next to the left border. That's the engine house that I showed the picture of earlier. You see that there? Can you see that?
I don't think so. I think it's further, right in the middle, further to the north, up the main line track. Further east.
I'm not sure where it is. Further east, and it's not in the picture? I know it's got to be close to the mainline tracks, but I'm not sure which one, and this is so small I can't even... Oh no, that's a grove of trees. Oh, sorry. Another thing that's pretty collectible, this is kind of fun because it shows the whole mill layout. It shows where the railroad came in from the north, from the west, I'm sorry. And those giant buildings look small. They're huge buildings.
That's the match right.
This building, the bottom building in this photo, the engineering building, that's big enough that a locomotive with a big smokestack can go in. And it had an overhead crane. They serviced their own engines, and they serviced other engines and donkeys. A donkey is a vertical boiler with a spindle to move logs and to do construction. I don't have a picture of that, but I should have one of those. Another thing that's real collectible are little badges. Everybody loves little badges. So here's a bunch of different ones. One on the left is Pacific Gas and Electric Railway Department. They had some railroads up by Bernie Reservoir, Bernie Lake, Diamond Match, and Hetch Hetchy Water. There's just a whole bunch of different ones, and it's kind of fun to collect those. And then other tags that people collect are, this is Diamond Match Company, Central Shop, and it's kind of funny that they didn't stamp a number. Somebody hand engraved all the numbers. This came from Randy Taylor as well. He has a bunch of them. They all have this hand engraved number. And of course, photos of the railroad are extremely rare and sought after. And the trestles, and just shows the crews on the logs, and just wonderful stuff. These are little steam locomotives that were used in the woods.
That was the narrow gauge system there in Chico Creek Canyon, upstream from Chico, some 25 miles?
It was meter gauge, right. Standard gauge is 4 foot 8.5 inches. Narrow gauge is 36 inches, and Diamond Match used meter gauge. And some of the locomotives, when they switched to standard gauge, or when they were switched to an area where they changed the distance between the wheels. You'll see, I'll talk about that in a little more. Here they are double heading, and it looks like they got a full load of logs. Here's another one. This is the number 6. See that bell right there? That bell's in my shop right now. But this is a great photo. I got it from a guy in Red Bluff, and he saw me coming. Here's another. I don't know if that's number 6 or not. I can't tell, but they're just wonderful photos of logging in the woods to our east. Diamond Match logging.
So where is number 6 now?
Number 6 now is probably in rafters. They've been melted down. It was scrapped.
Oh.
It was scrapped in '54, I think. I don't know if any of those little donkey engines are around now. There's a little one that used to be used in the building and construction of Butte Lake that's in Chester. It's just like one of these. It's pretty neat. They're little tiny dinkies. They call them dinkies. Another type of locomotive that was used a lot in logging and mining was the Shea type locomotive. And they're really kind of cool because the pistons are on the side like an automobile. They go up and down, and they turn a crankshaft. The crankshaft has universal gears and a slip joint. Why would the slip joint be needed? Because if the wheel turned, that drive shaft would have to be longer or shorter. So it had slip joints. And this is a small one. They had some that had 4 sets of wheels. But this is one of the Diamond Matches. This is the 101. And collectibles, I think that's the 101. Collectibles from the locomotive are incredible. All of the I can't remember what the word they call it. All of the appliances on the locomotive are collectible. The whistles, the bells, the builder's plates. And here's a builder's plate. Every locomotive had a builder's plate. There are volumes on where they went and who they went to or when they were scrapped. So the builder's plates are incredibly collectible. Builder's plates for some of the logging locomotives are thousands of dollars. So this is the locomotive I believe, for that locomotive. Here's another one, and there are a couple different kinds. The Willamette Steel and Iron Works, when the patents ran out for the Shea locomotive from Lima Locomotive Works, Willamette Iron and Steel Works came up with their special logging version, West Coast logging version, and they were really successful. I don't know why. Well, this is the 101. This isn't a Willamette. This is still the Lima. But here's the number plate off of that. And they're incredibly collectible too. They're heavy bronze. Pretty cool. I don't remember which one this is, but I think I showed this because you can see the whistle. This shows the whistle that if you figure out, well, I'm going to show you a picture of the whistle. Can you see a number on that? Oh, that is the number 6. Well, the bell's not there. I guess that's because it's in my shop. I don't know why the bell's not on here. Anyway. See the headlamp there, that's kind of cool. The guy, he's a pretty serious guy. So here's a whistle that might have come off of that locomotive. Now if you pull on that, it pushes down, and this pushes against the pressure of their boiler as well. Much harder to use than this type balanced valve. Now the one that I have, I had the arm made for it. The guy couldn't figure out. I showed him this picture and that's what I got, but it works. So I guess the shops and all of the logging camps made their own whistles, pulls and repairs. So it's very possible. It could have been a real one. So let's pretend like it's a real one. Here's a picture of the number 6. This came with the bell when I got the bell. I think there's another picture of the number 6. I don't know if that's the number 6 or not, but it shows the bell. There's a good picture of the bell on there, and here's the bell. Yeah, kind of fun. Now this is, I believe, is a Willamette, and I don't remember. Yeah, this is a Willamette. You see the sign just to the left of the guy, or just below the guy standing on the tender, or to the left of the woman in the door. That's a porcelain sign, and porcelain Willamette signs are real collectible, as are the builder's plates. The builder's plates for Willamette are incredibly valuable. This is actually, and there were only a certain number made, there, and everybody knows where everyone went. Unfortunately, I spent a lot of money for this one, and it's a reproduction. I didn't know. Found out later. Number 24 has been reproduced. Several of them have shown up. There were only 2 builder's plates for every one on each side of the boiler. And because they're so valuable, people are reproducing them. That's the way everything is. Here's a Willamette that's up across at Dunsmuir Park, up by Dunsmuir, right off Highway 5. It's a beautiful locomotive. You can see the pistons, you can see the universal joints, the slide gear. Now every wheel had pinion gears on it, so every wheel was powered and they could turn really sharp. Now why is that an advantage with a steam locomotive? Because you could follow the contour of the land. Like a rod engine, the kind we're all familiar with, takes a half a mile to turn because those rods don't allow you to turn the wheels very sharp. So that's why these locomotives were so valuable for. And then as a collectible, there's a sign. It's not off of that locomotive, but it's came from the Diamond Match, but I don't know which locomotive. It came from a Bill, Stagecoach Antiques Bill, whose family was involved with, but I don't know which locomotive it was off of. Kind of cool. Well, porcelain signs are really collectible. Most of you that collect know they're, and if you've ever watched the Antiques Roadshow, yeah, those guys like them when they're in junky shape. Most collectors like them in good shape. And here's the Diamond Match building. This is the one that got torn down. I didn't realize I had a picture of this before. Here's a before, and here's an after while they're tearing it down. So, and this was in I think it was in 85, 86, or 87, somewhere thereabouts. I don't remember for sure.
76.
Oh, is that early? 76, oh my. I'm, like I said, don't come to me for dates. I don't even remember my own kids' birthdays half the time. So here's another shot. It's kind of sad, that building. I guess that building wasn't earthquake proof, and the phosphorus and all the chemicals that went into the ground. And that's the problem with the Diamond Match grounds now, but it would have been really bad at the factory. But they had all kinds of different ways to promote Diamond Match products. And here's one. This is a sign that they probably had in their outlets, and they had outlets in different cities. There was one in Chico and one in Gridley and different areas, and I'm not sure where they all were, but this is a kind of out of place, but this is the Sterling City Mill. This is a picture, I believe, from Kent's book, but it shows a little bit of everything. And then when that mill burned in '58, this is what was left. And that was standard gauge down to Chico, although they had branches running out into the woods that were meter gauge. The number 6 locomotive I keep talking about was one of the meter gauge locomotives originally, and it was changed to standard gauge. So that was probably a pretty big task to take the wheels off and change the wheels. Here's another thing that really isn't relative to Butte County, but Hobart Mills, Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company, was a huge logging operation across the freeway from Truckee. And this would have been a boilerplate. I had this in my shop for a long time, but a friend of mine who also had couple different locomotives, was after me to get this for years. And the price, he just kept making higher and higher offers until he made a price I couldn't refuse, so. So he owns it now. That's Earl. Here's another interesting collectible. It's Chico Electric Railway souvenir card for opening day. I had this, and I think I gave this to Randy Taylor. He's done me so many favors. And I think he might even be here now on display. I'm not sure. Here's the inside. It gives the officers and some information about it. Here's another piece from Randy's collection. It's Chico Electric Railway opening day. This is on the corner of, if I'm not mistaken, Main and just south of 2nd Street. Chico Electric was only in business for about 6 months to a year. I'm not exactly sure. Once again, dates, but they were taken over by the Northern Electric, so they were very short-lived. Anything from that railroad is very rare. I don't know if that's Chico Electric or Northern Electric. Does it say Chico Electric on it? Yeah, I can't really identify where this is. Probably, yeah, I don't even know where. Any ideas? It was short distance. It didn't go all the way down to the shops. It was mostly in town, I think.
Sandy Gulch.
Sandy Gulch was the northern end, and the southern end, I don't know that it went
There's that 16th Street.
16th straight over to the, okay. Here's another shot. This might be, I don't know if this is Northern Electric, or Northern Electric took over Chico Electric, and I can't tell which this is, but it's that same type. Pardon? Well, here's the Sperry Mills, a shot from close to the mansion. Sperry Flour Mills is where Northern Star Mills is now. And those are probably some pretty early locomotive cars. They might be Central Pacific, or they could be Southern Pacific. If they're on, they could even be Northern Electric, I can't tell. Well, I'll take that back. See that emblem on the side of the car? Is that the same as that? And it's Northern Electric. This is a big cast iron sign. It's right back there in one of the display cases now. We don't know what it's from. It's just heavy, big sign. We don't know if it's off a bridge or powerhouse or Bill. Don't know. Could even be a reproduction, but it would have had to been reproduced from something. So, no way to tell. Never seen showed up in a photo yet. But here's a Northern Electric timetable. You can see that same iron cross. That was pre-World War I, so that iron cross didn't have any negative stigmatisms yet. The Germans used that in World War I on all of their military machines. Here's another Northern Electric shot. Northern Electric had these big, ungainly electric locomotives. Many of them they built themselves, and some of them came from other manufacturers. I don't know if they built this one. They may have. Here's another one. They just are big kind of boxes with electric traction motors. Anybody know where this is? This is that's right. This is a fun bridge. This bridge, they had to take the bridge down. This was over to the sugar mill, the Holly Sugar Mill in Hamilton City. They had to take it down because they didn't want to put the capital into a big bridge. So they'd put it up in the summer and after the flooding stopped, and then tear it down before the river raised a lot. So it was a pontoon bridge. They ran tracks out to the sugar plant. This is a well-known shot the local photographer took that's right in front of one of the houses on 5th Street. Pretty cool. I think that's Northern Electric. This shot is Trace Vias. The Northern Electric ran from Chico first to Sacramento with a spur to Oroville and a spur to Colusa. This is the spur, this is Trace Vias, and that was the spur to Oroville. little station there, and it's kind of cool. Now, they only went to Sacramento first. They didn't run all the way to the Bay Area yet. They would later. But this is a neat document that I found online, Northern Electric Railway Company, and it talks about how it connected with the California Transportation Company. I had never heard of the California Transportation Company except Caltrans. And we all see Caltrans because you see a bunch of guys standing around with shovels. Those are Caltrans guys. So they actually contracted with the railroad to run steamboats from Sacramento to the Bay Area. They actually later built Delta King and the Delta Queen, the California Transportation Company. So this was really a neat document to find. And I had found an artifact before I knew this, and I could never figure it out. So this helped me solve that. California Transportation Company, I thought, why would Caltrans need baggage tags? Well, now I know. Look at how many, they didn't have many, it appears. Here's another shot, that's just a great shot of some trainmen, Northern Electric. These big interurbans were different than the little trolleys. They were designed to go from city to city. The little trolleys were used in town, although these went into town as well. Here's another shot, and I think I included these two more that you can see the light. Remember the locomotive that had that light, the railroad lantern hanging on? Well, this light was developed later, and these lights could be switched from red to green for obvious reasons, and that's what this is. And so this next slide is another shot of the same thing. They had them on either side. This is a bridge, I believe this is the bridge. Oh, it says on there, Butte Slough Bridge. I don't know where that is. That must be from Yuba City to Colusa, I would guess. But I have some other things that will show that. Now here's one of those lights up close. And you can see where it says Northern Electric Railway. So that's called a lamp and not a lantern. And you can see how the apparatus is set up to slot. Steam engines use those, and they use these on the trolleys as well.
Are those electric?
The Northern Electric Railway.
No, were the lanterns electric? Or were they?
No, they were kerosene. There was a kerosene burner inside. Now later, a lot of them you find were electrified by the railroad or by hobbyists. It's nice when you find that were electrified by the railroad rather than hobbyists. Usually hobbyists drilled holes in them and did all kinds of weird things. If a hobbyist can do it, they did. So here's one from the Sacramento Northern. Now the Sacramento Railroad took over the Northern Electric Railroad, and Sacramento Northern Railroad was only in business a short time before it became railway. So this is kind of nice because it's railroad. Someone who's really good with dates could tell you the dates. I could give you a close, but I'm not that good with dates. Here's a detail of the tag. Hobbyist fakers are making the tags and putting them on. You can usually tell, but you get an eye for what you collect, and you can tell the fakes from the real ones. And everything you can imagine, those of you who collect know everything is being faked these days. The more valuable, the more it's faked. Now this is the back side, and it's interesting to see this because some of them you could reach up underneath, pull a pin and turn it, go from red to green. That would be facing the direction that the locomotive was going or that the caboose was going, so another train wouldn't run into it. Another style though, and that's this style, had a switch on the side that would change inside pieces, and they're both desirable. Now another kind of lamp that you see was a bridge lamp that was fixed. Nothing changed on it. It was mounted to a big bridge. The bridge I'm going to show you is really almost identical to the GNL bridge, but it was a Colusa, what was the city, Meridian Bridge. See that? Northern Electric Railroad. It's kind of cool, a little rusted, but here's the bridge. And if you look closely, you can see them up there. So you had to turn the whole bridge so one side would show or another. Now why would they need those up there? So a riverboat would know if the bridge was open or closed. That was why. So when it was open, it would be, it'd be in the middle, the riverboat guys would know about that. But something that puzzles me, and I've never found an answer, this bridge has a highway attached to the side of it. That just is shocking to me. How did that swivel also, or was that added later? Now that bridge is gone now, as is the Gianella Bridge, but it's cool to see it. Whoops. So there you see a detail. You can see the lamps up on top. And I'll show you a picture of Old Mod next. Old Mod was an engine that went across that pontoon bridge and used to go out. They couldn't put some of the heavy units on the pontoon bridge across the Sacramento River to go out to the sugar beet factory to carry beets out or product back, sugar back. So Old Mod, I don't know if it was designed specifically for that, for its weight, but I think that's Old Mod. But at any rate, I used to own the 402 headlight. It sat down in Peterson Tractor for I don't know how long, and I traded it for some stained glass, and somebody made me an offer I couldn't refuse, so I had to sell it. But this is a locomotive that was built in Chico, at the Chico Northern Electric shops. It has traction engines on each motor, and you can see the two different kinds of pickups, the pantograph or the arm to pick up the overhead wire, and it probably has shoes to pick up the third rail on the sides of the track. Most of you probably know, but the Northern Electric Railroad had hot, I think it was, I'm not even sure what the wattage was, 600 volt running right next to the ground. I mean, yeah, so you could probably jump from the ground up on top. As long as you weren't grounded, you were safe. But if you stepped up, you would get electrocuted.
Was that direct current?
I believe it was direct current, yeah.
Or was that electricity generated?
They had generation plants. I think some of the early was in the dam in Butte Creek. And I'm not exactly sure. They had transmission plants all over.
Every 10 miles.
Yeah, every 10 miles.
So
That logo that you showed, that looked like feathers or something, I believe. That was the logo.
well, the Iron Cross was the first logo for the for the Northern Electric.
Anyway, that was a logo I think that appeared on their generation stations.
Oh, interesting. That one that you saw the picture of. That yeah.
They had feathers. Kind of.
Were they steam powered stations?
The transmission,
No, they were actually, at that point, I think, just transforming from
transformers to keep the current high. So here's another shot of a locomotive that was made in the Chico shops, and it's another shot of the 402, big powerful electric locomotive with pantographs that you could raise up that would go against the overhead wires. This was probably at the Northern Electric mill on Mulberry, between Mulberry and Park Avenue, because I think that tower was down there, that water tower. And here is the 402 headlight, and here is I can't remember if that's I can't tell from my picture if that's that's the 103. That's like the 106, but it's the 103. And it shows the bell and the headlights. I think the reason I showed this is the next slide is a salesman sample of a headlight, or of an early kerosene headlight or whale oil headlight, or it was used on small trolleys, or it doesn't put out much light. This is in my collection. It's the U.S. Headlight Company, and it's the oldest headlight company in the country, and it probably wouldn't have been on anything local, but who knows. But it's kind of fun to see you always see these big headlights on the front. Some of them are on the front of an old locomotive. Some are as big as tall as a tall man. But this is a small one. This is only about 24 inches tall. But it's kind of fun to see the inside, how primitive they are. That's basically just a kerosene lamp in there. And it slides out, the door opens, it slides out, and inside you can see whoops, what did I do here? Can you now, never mind, it's right. So there you can see the filler cap on the left, the kind of the overflow tube so that it gets air. It's just like a kerosene lamp except that it's one of these. Now this particular one is really cool because on the top dome right there, not the bottom where the brass plate is, but up at the top, after I bought this because I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world, I started looking closely at it, and on the top it says I.A. Williams and Company, Utica, New York. So I started looking up. This guy had all the patents for that. He invented this light. He put together a kerosene lamp with this big thing, and he had all the patents. It was the first, I think it's Ira A. Adams, I think was his name, but I don't remember. Oh, Williams, I'm sorry. Ira Adam Williams or something like that, my memory once again. But at any rate, I looked it up, and he was the guy that owned all the patents, and it was the first railroad light. So this is a pretty cool thing I found. There it is again. It's only about this big, so it's got to be for something small, like a little one of those little, like old Mod or something like that, or a small trolley. Or it's a salesman sample because it has a handle, so I don't know. So can you see the I.A. Williams on there, and Company? I think it was painted on there one time, and the paint was so acidic, it etched the metal, and then somebody later on didn't want that name on it. So here's a shot of one of the trolleys going, one of the interurban units. There was a motorized trolley and probably a coach, and going right through town. I don't know where that is, but it looks like the park back there, so this might be just south of the park. And here's the Northern Electric shops, and that's the water tower I referred to earlier. And I don't know if it shows the two upper windows, the middle windows. There's a sign. Does that show on there? No? I have one of the original photos, and that was the Northern Electric, the Northern Electric shops. I can't tell if it's on there, but that's on there. And that house was moved over to Fair Street behind the little mini mall that's there. That house it used to be the engineering department, and it was a railroad hotel. And this, right, what you're looking at now is the Mulberry Shops from Park Avenue. Another thing that people collect is railroad tools. And here's a kind of a detailing: Sacramento Northern Railroad and Butte County Railroad. Here's a padlock that's pretty dear to me that was found by Randy Taylor underneath the Spanish language house right after they moved it. It used to be on 2nd Street. Is Randy here? Anyway, he found that, and he sold it to me years ago, and it was bent up, and I straightened it out and cleaned it up. But that's a Northern Electric Company switch key that would open all of the locks on the Northern Electric line. Okay, this is the Sacramento Northern Depot in all its grandeur. This is the artist's rendering for the building, and this would have been then the back side of this building, which later became a Greyhound bus depot. Here's a picture of a trolley, or a small trolley traveling by, anybody recognize where that is? Here's another shot of a Chico trolley. I don't know where that is, but probably on the Esplanade. There's a cross track wherever it is, who knows? And here's a Sacramento Northern Railroad padlock that's open only by a Northern Electric Company key. So this predates the railway. This is a pretty early Sacramento Northern padlock. And later, when the Western Pacific took over the Sacramento Northern, they used their padlocks, and the Sacramento Northern Railway key would open the Western Pacific and vice versa. And here you see a Sacramento Northern key with the same bit as a Western Pacific key, but notice it says railway. So I think it became railway in, once again I lose my dates, I think it became railroad in 17, and I think it became railway in the late 20s. But I don't remember for sure. I'm good with concepts, but numbers, This is a double embossed Western Pacific Railway lock, and you can date that by railway as well. That, for Western Pacific Railway, was earlier than railroad. It's opposite of the Sacramento Northern. So this is probably from '05 or '06, something like that. And it's embossed on both sides. Now here is from a collection of a very good friend. This is Lauren Dunlap's collection, and he was kind enough to let me shoot these photos at his place, or supply me with the photos. I don't remember. Are these your photos? Or did you shoot these, or did I?
Yeah, no.
These are, he was kind enough to supply me with these photos. Wonderful railroad china. This is Southern Pacific china. Each railroad, I don't know, Lauren would probably be able to answer this. I don't know if Sacramento Northern had their own china. I don't think Northern Electric did, or the Butte County Railroad. This is Southern Pacific, and their name trains were opulent and elegant, and they would even operate their name trains at a loss as an advertisement for the whole system. So this is some of their china, and it's Prairie Mountain Wildflower. It's just gorgeous stuff. Here's some more of it. Some more of it. It's just incredibly gorgeous. And the better stuff is marked. Some of it's not marked, but usually it's marked. Another type of china that I think is earlier than Prairie Mountain Wildflower. Is that correct? It's earlier?
Just a different trade.
Okay.
But yes, it predates.
Predates the Prairie Mountain Wildflower, the sunset logo, which is now, you see this a lot in Southern Pacific things. Some of you have been to the California State Railroad Museum down there and seen a giant stained glass of this that used to be at the Oakland Mole. It's pretty neat. Just beautiful stuff. I mean, I think for me, I work with stained glass every day. I have to be careful with my product every day. And there are times when I turn around and run into something, or hold a piece up and it didn't have metal around the outside, and it falls and I'm left holding two pieces of glass and the window's smashed. So I never really got excited about china because it's so fragile. So I leave it to my friends like Lauren. Have a soft touch. So these are all from his collection, just spectacular stuff. Isn't that incredible?
Yes.
And they even bottled their own wines. And then here's some more. I don't know if this is from your collection or mine, but we both have some of this. The Western Pacific Feather River route. Yeah, China is just, well, it's really funny. An interesting thing happened with China. When the internet came along, some of the China we thought was really rare turned out to be really common, and vice versa. It's just changed, turned everything upside down. But once again, the fakers too, a bunch of stuff that I had bought before the internet, suddenly it's fake. Now this is pretty self-explanatory. This is the head of I think an F unit, a diesel Western Pacific locomotive, and that sign there is real collectible. That's a porcelain sign. I have one of these in my shop. Also another type of sign that's pretty collectible for railroad collectors is a stainless steel sign. Mine is not painted up quite as nicely as, mine is kind of rough, but they're stainless steel. It's really heavy and really strong. You can see that remnants of paint. Some guys use, you can still buy high quality paints, and sign painters, I don't remember what it's called, but you can buy still real enamels and sign painters paints. Nowhere else can you get it. Step stools, the passenger trains had a step stool the porter would put out, and I don't know if this is probably was painted by one of those rail fans. I don't remember where I got this one, but sort of matches, excuse me, matches the locomotives. Beautiful locomotives. Excuse me, this is a, I'm starting to get tired, give me a second here. This is a GS type locomotive, GS4 through GS6 or something like that. And they're massive. This one was restored and resides in Portland, Oregon, and it runs every so often. But it's really a good indicator of the colors, but it's also a good indicator of the size. It's a northern style wheel. That means the wheel range. There's 4 wheels in front. There's 8 driving wheels and 4 wheels behind in the locomotive. It's a massive locomotive. Well, on Christmas Day in 1931, a train heading south with the Orberg, with George Orberg's mother and George Orberg. You've heard of Orberg Gallery at Chico State? They were passengers on a train just like this that was heading south, and on Christmas Day in 1931, the boiler exploded. And this is the result. There's a picture of probably an insurance man, a railroad executive, no, I don't know. But you can see how massive that boiler explosion was. And what happens when a boiler explosion happens is the water gets low in the boiler and goes below what's called the crown sheet, where the fire is under the crown sheet. It melts, and steam, when it explodes, expands at some ungodly, anybody know the 1,700 times. I mean, it's scalding hot and it's horrible. You can see the power it has. I have a couple other photos I've acquired recently. They're just photocopies of photos that show the part of that boiler that flew off and plowed into the ground. I think I have another shot of that boiler. Well, here's the story, and a local woman describes it. This was taped to the back of the photo when I got it. And it talks about George Orberg being a child, and the engineer and fireman were killed. But here's another shot. After it was dragged, the locomotive was dragged to Roseville, someone stood on the tender and took a picture of the boiler. So those boiler tubes, it's like spaghetti. Boiler explosions were extremely dangerous. That's why now any of the tourist lines that have steam locomotives have to be checked frequently. I don't know if it's every year or what the rate is, but they are regulated heavily for this reason. Now here's a picture of a steam locomotive. It's the same type of locomotive, but it's just not painted up fancy. I believe that's the Chico Depot. Rare shot. There aren't many shots of the Chico Depot. Pardon?
Where's the water tower?
The water tower may not have even been built yet, but it would have been way north of that, because that's on 5th. The water tower's on, what is
Water
there?
tower's on the south side of 5th Street.
No, it's farther north than that. No? Really? Well, if it's on the south side, you're standing, it's probably right behind you then.
Right.
Is it gone now? Oh, I didn't know there was a water tower there, the south side. So it's probably, you're looking north, so it would have been probably, if it's on the south side of 5th, it would have been behind you. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know there was a tower there. Very interesting.
That's what you did on Friday nights.
Anybody see the American Freedom Train when it came through? That's one of those big GS locomotives. The next slide I was a postcard I bid on, I didn't get, but I have to show it to you because it's just so cool. This is taken in Colfax, and the beauty of this is one of those giant Southern Pacific cab forward locomotives. Does anybody know why they put the cab in front? They would. The sheds would. They generated so much smoke and soot and gases that it could asphyxiate the engineer and the fireman or anybody else that's on the train. They came up with the idea, and I don't think it was original because I've heard of European trains, and I've also, one of the Northwestern Pacific's, the engineer made one of their trains into a cab forward. It's a great idea so that you're in front of the smokestack, which is in the back. Now, to give you an idea, here's a massive locomotive. You can see how much smoke that would generate if you were in the back cab. The cab were back there by the tender. This is a Western Pacific locomotive, not the same as this. But the reason I included this is the little narrow gauge, Nevada County narrow gauge went to Colfax had a connection from Nevada City and
Nevada City and, what's the other now?
Grass Valley.
God, I couldn't think of Nevada City and Grass Valley had a connection with Colfax, and they would connect with this train, and that's one of their locomotives. So you can get an idea of the size of the locomotives on the Nevada County narrow gauge compared to those monster Southern Pacific cab forwards.
What they call valleys.
Mallets, yeah. Mallets was articulated 2 sets of drivers. It's like 2 locomotives with 1 boiler. Just amazing. Now here's one that the Western Pacific had, number 253, and you can see how massive they are. They're just giant. 2 sets of drivers, 2 sets of pistons. Now I include this one to show you the way they looked before, but I also included because give you an idea what it looks like from the front. They're just giant. But I have a cool story. If we run over, feel free to leave. Some of you are leaving. I'm probably going to run over. Numbers. So anyway, this is the front of this locomotive. If you look closely, it's number 253. Well, I was teaching a stained glass class in Orville, and I had 2 old timers. They were just really fun. They had lots of stories, and one old timer talked about a locomotive derailing during the war, but he could find no records of it. So I started looking. I could find, apparently during the war, any information about the railroads, you couldn't get it. Very little, if anything, because of espionage. So apparently this locomotive during the war derailed and kind of fell down the side of one of the embankments in the Feather River Canyon, and they dragged it back up and put it back together. But apparently the front pipe thing and headlight and the number plate were gone, so they had to replace it. Well, years later, this locomotive engineer told me, I know the guy that found that number plate. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he and his wife were out hunting in the Feather River Canyon, and I said, by the road? He goes, oh yeah, but there weren't many cars then. I said, well, but it was still in the 70s, I think. Anyway, although it derailed way before that. Anyway, that front had come off and been buried in the ground for many, many years, and he and his wife were there hunting, and they saw where a modern diesel derailed in the same place, and it had been carrying a car that had diapers, plastic wrapped diapers. They were all over the side of it. So he and his wife got the idea to salvage it and make some money. And they found this front end of this train sticking out of the dirt. And so I ended up buying the number plate from him. There it is. And the guy made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So, I mean, they're incredibly valuable. And this guy, he's since passed away, but he was an engineer at Disneyland, and he said, I make more money in retirement than I made when I was running trains. So I don't know how much he made, but he was comfortable. And every time I'd see him at all the railroad shows, the offer kept getting higher and higher. And finally he made an offer I couldn't refuse. So this is a McKean motor car. A lot of the railroads, when times were tough, started running McKean motor cars. They were gasoline powered or diesel powered. I think they were gasoline. They call them stinkers too sometimes because the gasolines. A lot of the railroads ran them, but if you look closely, you see this is actually the Chico depot with a McKean motor car sitting out front. Just thought it was kind of cool. And signs, of course, are very collectible, especially railroad signs. I was fortunate to buy this from the wife of a guy who fell on hard times, the Chico, California Amtrak sign, and my son borrowed it for his office and it got stolen. So if you ever see that, let me know. I know who has it, but he's a criminal and scary guy, so I'm not gonna. But that's was a hand-painted sign finished really nicely, and when Amtrak ended, there were 2 of these, and they both went to different people. And the sign under that was self-explanatory. All the depots had a Railway Express Agency sign. And then some more padlocks, my passion. These are Southern Pacific padlocks. They were used for different purposes, and most people don't know what the purpose was. The one says freight, the one on the right, it's a big, massive lock. And the one on the left, actually the one next to it, second from the right, says switch. The other two are, say, I think it's, I can't remember, 72 and 300. Nobody knows what they were used for. They have a special purpose, but back in 1905 or whatever it was when Harriman was in control, they had special purpose locks, and they had their own special keys, and those keys are called Euler keys. People used to think it was because you could oil them through the little hole, put it into the padlock, but I've been told that's not true. So I don't know why they're called Oilers, but they are. And these are pretty self-explanatory. Southern Pacific and Union Pacific had specialty locks. There's a Western Pacific one like that too, only one, not three different sizes like those. The top ones are called shield locks, and the bottoms are Southern Pacific logo locks. These are called fancy back locks, and they're literally worth their weight in gold, especially the rare ones. The common ones aren't, but the rare ones are pretty good. Like that Santa Fe System lock's a $5,000 lock. Yeah. There are some locks that are worth more than that. I'll show you some pictures of those later. This is that's a system lock with a Santa Fe lantern and a Santa Fe baggage tag, a logo baggage tag. And this is a kind of a cool shot. It shows the locomotive. It's called a deck. It was usually used as a helper locomotive to get up over mountains and grades. These were used a lot in the mountains to get from Reading up to, a lot of them were stationed in Dunsmuir to get up the hill to Mount Shasta. And this is the builder's plate from that locomotive when it was rebuilt. And I, as a kid, my elementary school class toured the San Bernardino Santa Fe shops. So things like that are pretty dear to me. That made a strong impression. I think one of the neatest things was right outside of the business office, they had a model train that was probably 10 foot long, and just like a big one shrunk. And I think that might be part of the reason I'm a collector. Who knows why. My grandfather, on my father's side, was a switchman for the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railway in Illinois. And as you know, it snows and freezes pretty heavy. And when my dad was a child, he was 3 years old, my grandfather stepped on a rail and slipped, fell under a train, and it separated him. So I've been around train lore and history my whole life, but the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern was very helpful. They supplied the coffin for my grandmother. That's all they did. Back in those days, they could do whatever they wanted. So Santa Fe is dear to me, and a lot of guys are partial to Santa Fe. But I have a friend in Ashland, Oregon, who's probably the biggest fanatic that any of us know in the railroad circles. He and I become good friends. A lot of people don't like him because he's so aggressive a collector. But you see that Dodge City Depot sign? He owns it now. It's huge. So here's another Santa Fe. Here's a Santa Fe logo from the San Diego Depot, and they're still there. They used to have a lunchroom attached to the depot, and someone told me they tore it down in the 50s, and I had heard about it, but the tile in the San Diego Depot is legendary. It's just beautiful arts and crafts tile. Those of you that collect tile or ceramics can attest how beautiful it is. It's kind of a neat story, and I didn't learn it. I bought this piece of tile from an old railroad conductor. He said it came from the lunchroom at the Santa Fe Depot that was torn down in the 50s. And it turns out, I did a lot of research on it. It's pretty good size, 36 by 36 in a wooden frame. It turns out the man that I got it from, he didn't know much about it. So I started doing research on the Santa Fe Depot in San Diego, and it turns out, you've all heard of the book that the railroads financed to travel west, all the glories of traveling west. I can't remember what it's called, but it was written by this guy's grandfather. So he made quite a bit to do that book, and he was offered, this is kind of a bizarre, convoluted story. He was offered a piece of property and some capital to do one on Baja, California. And he did it, and he moved his family to Baja, to a ranch on Baja, and things went along fine. And then when Pancho Villa seized power, he was afraid for the lives of his family and relatives that lived there with him. So he turned it over to his ranch foreman and moved his family north up by Vista, north of San Diego. And his son found clay deposits around Vista that he thought were going to rival the clay from China and make fine china. Well, that was a flop. It never worked. But he did develop a way to do hydraulic press tiles so that instead of having to be an extremely skilled painter to paint them, it'd be like paint by numbers, and you could hire some talented craftspeople. It still took some skill, and that's what this is. That's what these, and he got the commission to do the San Diego Depot and to do the World's Fair. His name was Charles Nordhoff, the grandson of this guy that moved his family north to save him from Pancho Villa, theoretically. And Charles Nordhoff got bored with his California Pottery Company, which is what it was called, and moved his family to Tahiti. He co-wrote Mutiny on the Bounty, Pitcairn Island, and one other book that my great memory has lost. But Charles Nordhoff, turns out, this has got a great history, so this piece is at my shop. Yeah. Oh, I think that might be my last slide. So, that concludes my slide presentation.